So, it looks like the fitness industry has a cult problem. Since I'm often very critical of the fitness industry, from its willingness to sell fake supplements to the possible dark side of indulging too much in individualism, I will often get people asking things like this. What do you think of a spin class actually? They have a weird cult vibe to you. So no, group fitness is not a cult. Barry's Boot Camp, Soul Cycle, it's not a cult. That being said, what this chatter is correctly picking up on are the themes of cult-like behavior that are certainly pervasive through all corners of the fitness industry. So today we're going to be discussing why everything feels so cult-adjacent these days, why it feels like everyone is falling for an obvious scam, and how can we tell who's grifting and who has gone genuinely insane.
You're not ugly, you just need to lose some weight. No, yeah, it's true. I will be the bestie that you don't have. You would look better if you lost some weight.
I think the way that a culty mindset has slowly worked its way into the industry is explained by the industry's relationship to purity and purity requirements. And I know what you're thinking. Purity, that sounds like a religious thing, and I just want to look good in a Speedo. Trust me, I'm right there with you. Plus, this girl's not spiritual, she's just a bitch. And again, I agree. But let's take a step back, because it's a little more nuanced. Diets are tricky because everyone's relationship to food is vastly different. But at its core, food is just one method of controlling your behavior. We have woven into the fabric of our society the idea that control is a good thing. Just think of the way that people refer to not sticking to their diet plan. You've given into temptation, you've been bad, you've let yourself go. Notice how there's a morality aspect to the way people are talking, and that's because in our society, controlling yourself is seen as a path to righteousness and goodness. And this can be whether you're conscious of it with your righteous aspirations to save yourself before marriage, or it can be subconscious, like how people say they don't consume chemicals they can't pronounce. These are all methods of control. Cults will often take advantage of this concept of purity in order to keep people in line. When taken to an extreme, members of cults are incentivized to isolate and maintain an environment of fear of judgment from their leader or other members of the cult that might want to snitch on them for disobeying. But this method of policing does not limit itself to the walls of a cult. Who needs a cult leader when you have the constant, never-ending thoughts inside your head about how you're ugly and not good enough? And of course, there's nothing wrong with wanting order, but there is such thing as too much control, and the nuance comes from the subject of who is trying to motivate you to control yourself. And with all that being said, allow me to introduce you to Liv Schmidt and the resurgence of Skinny Talk. Skinny Talk is a community on TikTok that collectively aspire to be as skinny as possible. But that's actually giving them way too much credit. Skinny Talk is just a holdover of the ideas from Tumblr anorexia. You know, nothing tastes as good as skinny feels. Your stomach isn't grumbling, it's actually giving you a round of applause. Just garbage. It's an environment of caloric-based torture covered in a thin veneer of aspirational content, and Liv Schmidt is their queen. Schmidt was an influencer on TikTok who spent most of their time giving wrong advice about dieting to their nearly 700,000 TikTok followers. And I say was because in 2024, she was banned from TikTok for promoting eating disorders. But she's still vibing on Instagram because of course she is. And guys, here's the thing. I'm not a doctor. I'm not even a dietitian. And I can still say with my full chest, Liv's advice is some of the dumbest shit I've ever heard. Truly terrible advice with no bearings on reality, like this video she made.
A skinny mindset should sound like this. Ordering the pasta, eating 5 beautiful bites, feeling glamorously full, and pushing it away without a second thought. 5 bites, full life. When you finally stepped into your effortlessly controlled era.
Awful. Just awful. Psychologically, you're setting yourself up for failure because you're not satisfying your cravings, but also economically, it's wasteful and dumb. What are we doing? Recently, a new article from The Cut came out that dives into all of Liv's internet activities. Mostly the article focuses on Liv's private online group she calls the Skinny Society. For $20 a month, you'll be invited to a forum that's sole purpose is to promote eating disorders. Instagram demonetized this group after the article came out, which is great, but now Liv is selling $2,900 a month skinny experiences because apparently when you chop off one head, yada yada yada. And this is where the conversation of purity comes back in, because even if we exclude Liv and her grift, the way we feel about our bodies is such a shameful subject that we let the judgment of others be the leader of the cult that we can never please. Purity rules are not about bettering yourself, it's not about achieving a goal, they are about maintaining and reinforcing the power of the group. It's about surveillance. And if you leave, you don't get to take any of the power with you, which keeps people miserable but trapped in the idea that without the group, they will be more miserable and more lost. And that's why these communities exist. Despite what's going on in the world, you can still feel like you're better than someone else. You can feel as if you have power over something, and there's no limit to how far you can take it. This community believes to be skinny is to be good, to be fat is to be bad. No nuance. If you can't achieve it, you're not good enough. And that's kind of the point, right? Striving to be perfect in a world where perfect doesn't exist. It is genuinely sad, though. The more you look into Liv Schmidt's life, the more you can tell she is just so hell-bent on living the lifestyle that was sold to us as a late 90s Victoria's Secret supermodel. So I actually don't think she's genuinely trying to harm people. And because of that, it's actually kind of wild how naturally Liv falls into the cult playbook here. But of course she did not build this all herself. It's been totally normalized online, where if we see someone who looks successful at a thing, we just take their advice as if it's gospel. If you see someone with huge arms and they tell you they got them by doing this, you might be inclined to ignore your better judgment and believe them, despite it looking dumb as fuck. But my point is that people look to Liv for advice not because she says anything correct, but because she looks the part. And on that subject, I think it's important to state that I am not an expert in cults. I just think they're neat, I love to read about them, but in this video I'm not going to label what is or isn't a cult because I'm not educated enough to make those calls. But by understanding the similarities and the purpose of cults themselves, you'll be a lot more vigilant to notice the traps that people are setting in front of you with their charisma and their storytelling.
And hate always comes from within, right? When people really hate their lives, because most people do, they go to jobs that they hate, they come home to lives they don't love, they sedate themselves with enough bull, right? And so they hate themselves so much that they project that hate above them.
The Liver King is a fitness guru who was skyrocketed into internet fame, building a massive fan base around his 9 core ancestral tenets: sleep, eat, move, shield, connect, cold, sun, fight, and bond. The Liver King in his prime made hundreds of videos about how the modern age has made men soft. And it was his self-determined mission to create a world where men are jacked with higher testosterone, leading them to a higher quality of life. But of course, the most viral aspect of all of his content is that his diet was made of primarily raw meats. The Liver King claimed that the way he lived was the reason for his physique. He said he was totally natural and that his methods of primal living are what's responsible for the body he has. He claimed that until some leaked emails revealed that he was indeed on a lot of steroids. What separates Liver King from most fitness influencers is, well, apart from the diet, is that he actively downplayed the monetary incentives of his business. In his videos and interviews, he's always focused on the mission, which is a return to traditional living. He was lying, of course, but in a world of influencers showing off Birkin bags and clothing hauls and flagrant consumerism, he was able to hook people on what they believed was an authentic approach to life. So I get why he was so appealing. And again, this is where it comes back to cults, because in them, this behavior is incredibly common. People like Liv Schmidt are actually rare because it is not often you have a leader following their own rules. And this exemption from the law is set in place as a flex of authority. It is not an accident, it is not them acting stupid, it is a method of reinforcing the power of the leader. Think about how often religious leaders will wave their pitchforks about protecting children, all while having child on their desktops. The book Uncultured shows in its text how David Berg often made a show of rejecting worldly corruption, all while running a cult that exploited everyone in it, emotionally, financially, and sexually. And this is where, once more, it comes back to purity. Because at its core, the Liver King was just selling a hyper-masculinized version of orthorexia, which is the obsession with healthy eating. And usually the all-natural lifestyle fits into the trad wife box, right? Like, it's all-natural homemade bread. Instead of a cupcake, try feeding your child a grape. You know, stupid shit like that. But those ideas are feminine, right? The masculine version of being pure and good is to be one with nature. You know, like discussing the concept of being one with your ancestors while flying in your private jet. Simple stuff, guys. But I do think the aspiration to be a big man who people are afraid of is the hyper-masculine version of wanting to be good. Because it harkens back to a time of simplicity. It's biological determinism at its most basic. It is a Walmart understanding of how gender and life works. But despite that, I can totally understand why people would feel comfortable in the aspiration to be as big and scary as possible. In the same way, I can understand why people would feel righteous in trying to be as skinny as possible. But realistically, there can be no peace when you're living with such extremes. And sooner or later, you'll end up making videos from your phone telling people how great you are from your mansion infested with cockroaches. The Liver King's popularity dropped pretty drastically after he was outed as a fraud, but of course, he's not done. Netflix just released a documentary about him. Genuinely, there's like no information about this thing. I don't think anyone watched it except maybe for me, and that was just for performance art, so I don't even think that counts. But my point is that it's mostly a commercial for his 302 ranch retreats, where he and a select few will pay to go and learn about ancestral living. Gosh, where have I heard of that before? A washed-up egomaniac getting caught sharing harmful rhetoric, quickly pivoting to siphoning off money from a few that are still caught up in the facade. What does that sound like, and is there a pattern? I'm sure it doesn't matter.
Did you know that if you combine 14 ounces of tofu, 10 dates, a half cup of cocoa powder, and a cup of almond milk, you can make the most delicious chocolate mousse that's vegan, dairy-free, oil-free, and packs 45 grams of protein?
Joseph Abel here is a fitness influencer who for the most part does a really good job sharing authentic and good information. However, I bring him up because he's one of my favorite examples of how the need to be pure can be really hard to shake off. What do I mean by that? Well, Joseph here is very open about having previously been in a cult. And let me be crystal, I am glad that he is happy and healthy, and I don't want to discredit any of the emotional labor that it took him to escape a religious cult like the one he was in. But although he talks at length about how he was driven to rebuild his life after getting out of the cult, he is less communicative about what habits might have possibly crossed over subconsciously from his cult to his everyday life. He's constantly making lifestyle content around subjects like how to get abs or recipes for low-calorie food he likes. He even shares his rigorous daily routine. And the reason I bring him up last is because he doesn't really stand out from other fitness lifestyle influencers. And I don't think Joseph is a bad person. I don't even think he's done anything wrong. However, I think it's interesting that we have not gotten any kind of introspection from him regarding the idea of escaping versus moving. Is there a possibility that just because you're no longer controlled, you still crave that reinforcement? It's subtle, but there's a massive difference between the narrative of I survived a cult and now my life is way better, and I survived a cult filled with rigorous structure and rules. Now, here's the 4 steps you need to take in order to get abs so your life can be way better. I don't know, I just think that's a really interesting concept. I would love to ask him these questions in person. Now, putting aside Joseph and those lesbian glasses, what's far more embarrassing are the people who sound like Joseph who have never been in a cult. That is the truly nefarious aspect of purity requirements in this industry, because we're at the point where people can sound like they just escaped a cult without ever having been around one. And I think the best thing you can do to avoid these traps is associate yourself with people who aren't trying to tell you what to do, but instead trying to show you something they like. And I know this is going to sound real tacky, but one of my favorite quotes about dieting is from cook Eat, Repeat by Nigella Lawson. In her chapter about pleasures, it begins like this. If I could ban any phrase, it would, without a doubt, be that overused, viscerally irritating, and far from innocent term itself, the guilty pleasure. No one should feel guilty about what they eat or the pleasure they get from eating. The only thing to feel guilty about is the failure to be grateful for that pleasure. Bars. Your body will never be the problem. There might be room for improvement, but you are not an issue to be fixed. And on that note, I'm done. Alright, that's all I got, fam. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see ya next time.